Hello everyone, Screenplay Archaeology host Pyramid Head here. Before we get into today's episode, I just want to get some intro stuff out of the way. First things first, we are now part of the Fandom Limb Media podcast network, so I'm going to link their site down below. And that's why you would have just heard a promo for another podcast, because they're another one of the shows on the network. And as per usual, if you like the show and you'd like to know more, you can check out our social media pages on Facebook, Tumblr, Twitter, and even Instagram now. The show also has a Patreon if you're willing to gift money, but you don't really need to if you don't want to. And we also have a Discord server, which you can join if you want to chat with, the group members there. So that link is going to be down below as well. So yeah, sit back, guys, and enjoy the show. Alright everyone, hello and welcome to a new episode of the Screenplay Archaeology podcast. I'm your host, Pyramid Head, and first off, I'd like to apologize for the delay on this episode. It absolutely was unintended. I had all my notes and stuff together. It was going to be a little late. It was going to hit end of June instead of earlier, because I just hadn't decided what I was going to do that month yet. And then technical issues came up. My laptop's battery fucked up, to put it lightly. It started reading as not plugging in, and then it was reading as in it wasn't installed even though it was, so I replaced the battery. Simple procedure, went easily enough, but then I try opening Audacity and it either does not open or it crashes my audio, the built-in audio on the laptop, so it was unusable. So I had to get a new laptop. That took days, transfer everything over. So that's all cleared and out of the way. What the fuck I'm going to do later in July, no idea. But we got an episode here now, and we're going to be covering an early draft of Clear and Present Danger, written by John Milius. And the story of this one is basically, if you've seen the movie, the basic story is that the character of the series, Jack Ryan, is now the acting deputy director of intelligence at the CIA because his mentor is dying of cancer. But a new operation gets kind of started behind his back. It's different here from the movie and the book for reasons I'll get into later. But basically it's an operation going after drug lords in Colombia because of tied into an incident where they went after a courier who was stealing money from them, and that sort of touched off this whole thing. It's a little more complicated than that. And so it's basically Jack Ryan has to figure out what's going on and then figure out how to deal with it while these soldiers are down in Colombia, fighting the cartel. And then things go bad from there. I'm just going to leave it at that because we're going to get into all the plot details later. The whole reason I decided to do this is because I have been since late last year off and on listening to Tom Clancy's Jack Ryan books through Audible. And holy crap, are these some of the longest audio books I've ever listened to, and I haven't even gotten to the longest one yet. But it's one of those things where I've always enjoyed the movies, and I figured I'd go through the books, and literally just weeks ago, it would have been 2 weeks when I originally was going to record this, but now it's more like 3 or 4 by the time this comes out. I had literally just finished listening to Clear and Present Danger, the book, and I figured this would be fun to go back, read the script again, see how I feel about it, and compare it to the movies. And before I get into that, I'm just going to say where I'm falling on the series so far. I'm enjoying the books. I started with Without Remorse, which is the origin story of John Clark, a CIA operative who's a character who's very prominent in this script. In fact, the first book he was prominent in was Clear and Present Danger. He appeared in Cardinal of the Kremlin and then was a big part of this and was a pretty decent-sized part of the books going forward, from what I understand. And so I started with that one, really liked it because I knew the premise basically. I'd read a couple of screenplay versions of it and that sounds up my alley, I'll start there. Was really good. And I decided to go chronological from there, and I decided to stick to the stuff Clancy either wrote by himself before a certain point, because my understanding is that there's like a definite jump off point with these books where after that point they're just nowhere near as good, and then eventually there's like a 5 year break, and then he has like a bunch of co-writers working on the books with him, and then he dies, and the co-writers they all take over it. So I'm stopping before co-writers. And my jump off point is going to be Baron the Dragon if I can get through it, because that book sounds like it's going to be a slog to get through from everything I've heard about it. But that's going to be my jump off point. But so I went chronological, mainly just because I had already done Without Remorse. So I went to Patriot Games. Patriot Games, to keep it brief, pretty good. It spends a long goddamn time farting around in like the first third of the book with Jack Ryan in the hospital, fucking hobnobbing with the royals, getting a private tour of the Tower of London. Like once he gets back to America, it's slow in a good way, but man, was there a lot of what just felt like bizarre wish fulfillment in that early part of the book, aside from the hospital part, which was just boring. But that one was good. Hunt for Red October is very good. It was a weird experience because I feel like Patriot Games, the movie, stuck a little closer to the book than Red October did, because Red October, like, it changed some significant stuff, don't get me wrong. But Red October, they really, like, condensed that down and, like, changed the focus in a really good way for the movie. So Red October was really good, but it was just a bizarre experience. Cardinal of the Kremlin may be my favorite so far. I wish they had just done that movie instead of all the drama we're going to get into of like the behind the scenes of which book were they going to adapt, blah, 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 blah. That one they should have just done directly after Red October. It would have solved a lot of their problems if they had just done that. But I guess because it wasn't the Cold War anymore, even though it really wasn't when they made Hunt for Red October, and they had no problem just going, hey, it's a period piece in 1980, set in 1984. I don't know why they couldn't just do that with Cardinal, but whatever. Clear and Present Danger, also really good. That one I was worried about because I'd heard some things about how the story was structured, but I ended up liking it more than I didn't. And I'll talk about that. I'll talk about more stuff from that as I go along, talking about the script because it's more relevant there. And I am like 15, I'm quite a few hours into Some of All Fears right now. And if that keeps it up, that one might be my new favorite because it's just, aside from one really fucking annoying character whom, if you've read the book, you know exactly who I'm talking about, where every time you're in this person's head, you're like, oh my god, get to the next chapter already. The book has been really fascinating, if kind of naive in some of the geopolitical stuff it's doing. But so far, that book is really great. Now, my introduction when I was a kid was the Sum of All Fears movie, which I didn't see again until recently. Oh my god. The movies are interesting because the first three, I think, really get it down good. Hunt for Red October is great. It's a classic. It changes from the book, but does it in a lot of really interesting ways that make it a better movie. And overall, it's just a classic. Patriot Games, I like. I think it makes a lot of smart decisions in adapting from the book, like cutting down all that crap at the beginning, condensing it into like I feel like it's basically a Patriot Games, just condensed version. The only real issue I take with it is that, like, the motivations of some of the characters aren't explained very well at all. Like, the whole, like, IRA splinter group that are the villains of the piece aren't given any development. They're just there. The only one who's given any development at all is Sean Bean's character, and even that is changed from the book, which I think is an interesting change, but it's not really clear what the hell the grander organization is even trying to do in the movie, which I didn't really notice until after I listened to some people talk about it. Like, I listened to like a podcast about it, and then I read the book, and I'm like, oh wow, they really did just kind of gloss over that whole part of the story. But I still think it's a pretty solid thriller. I think that scene where I mean, because Harrison Ford, Alec Baldwin, I think, is my preferred Jack Ryan actor, but Harrison Ford's still really good. But that scene where he's brought into like the room and they're like watching on screens as like the soldiers go in and take out the terrorist camp over satellite. That's one of the coolest fucking things I've seen in the movie, and kind of fucked up too when you think about it. But I mean, that's one of the best scenes. One of my favorite scenes in any like action thriller is that scene. And then you get the Clear and Present Danger movie, which makes wider and broader changes to the source material, but it's hard for me to describe because I think the changes for the most part really work, aside from like two or three of them, and those two or three are notable enough, like some of the characterization, like John Clark and Ding Chavez, those particular John Clark more than Chavez, and it's really more the one scene with Clark. The rest of the movie he's fine, but his introductory scene makes him look like this makes him look bad in a way. I'll talk about it later when I get into the script. But that's that thing, and the way they sort of had to like rechange it around to kind of center Ryan more is like a big thing. That's the big thing they changed because Ryan in the book is like barely in it, and then the last third is like all Ryan, and he's doing all this stuff, looking into everything, figuring things out, fixing the problem. And I can understand why they would change that. You can see them trying to change that in the draft I'm going to talk about. But I think they did a good job with that in the movie. It's just certain things they do with the story are a little odd. It's not like stuff you needed to do. Like centering Ryan is something you kind of need to do for the movie, especially when you have a guy like Harrison Ford playing him and the audience expects a bigger role. But some of the other things they changed, it's like, well, why did they do that? Some of it felt like it was more in service of other concerns. Like I'll get into it. I'll get into it later because like there's certain characters who aren't even in this script who do make it into the movie. It's fascinating. And then they farted around for years until Harrison Ford and Philip Noyce, who was the director who took over for John McTiernan, they walked from Some of All Fears. They turned it into a reboot with Ben Affleck, and that was my introduction when I was a kid. I didn't see it again until like last year. Oh my god, that movie is mediocre. There's some good scenes in it, but it's just bland. And then that attempt at a franchise, it made money, but it fell apart because Ben Affleck did Geely a year later, and then Paramount's like, fuck, we can't hang a franchise on this guy anymore. So they sat on it for 12 years. They do the Chris Pine movie, Jack Ryan Shadow Recruit, which isn't based on any book, it's an original story. And it's also very mediocre, very forgettable. The best thing about that movie is Chris Pine because he's actually like, I actually kind of bought him in the role more than I thought I would. I just saw that for the first time last year because I just watched all the movies, and he's good. It's fucking weird that it's a Kenneth Branagh movie, man, because it doesn't feel like something he would make. And bizarre of all, he plays the villain in that movie, and it's almost exactly the same character he would later play in Tenet. It's so weird how close it is. But yeah, that movie I don't think did very well. That went nowhere. They end up doing it ends up Jack Ryan ends up getting done as a TV show on Amazon, which I haven't seen yet. The general gist of it, from what I've heard, is that the first season's good, second season's bad, and then the third and fourth seasons are anywhere from like middling to also bad. And they're talking about doing a movie spin-off of that, which maybe I'll watch those seasons in preparation for the movie if that actually gets a release date, but we'll see. And in the midst of that, there was a Without Remorse movie that Paramount shot, sold it to Amazon in the midst of COVID, and then they release it. And I watched that movie. That movie's a piece of shit. That's the worst by far because it's so bland, it's so boring. They took two things from the book. I don't know why you're bothering adapting the book if you're only going to take two or three things from it, and even then barely use them. And then the movie, it's not even a good movie in its own right. It's this extremely dull military thriller with a plot twist you can see coming from like 3 miles off because there's an actor who enters the movie, and as soon as you see them, you're like, bad guy. And you're right. It's so bizarre just how predictable they went with that. It's like, did you really expect people not to figure that out from like minute one? And it's just a bad movie. And Michael B. Jordan, I'm not against his casting in the role, but they gave him nothing to work with in that movie. He's like adrift. And it doesn't help. There's a scene where he's like, there's a party near the beginning of the movie where he interrupts two people playing chess to like correct what they did, and what he does is like against the rules of chess. It's like, come on, man, you were in The Wire, you were taught how to play chess. D'Angelo would be so ashamed of you. But yeah, so the cinematic legacy of Tom Clancy is interesting. There's a few more things, Clancy related things I could do future episodes on. And I'll probably get more into like some of that as it goes along. But like they tried Without Remorse quite a few times. I've got a Some of All Fear script that they didn't make that would have been a sequel. I got several Rainbow Six scripts, and I got this one he wrote about like a real life battle called The Battle of 73 Easting. So there's stuff I could potentially do down the line. We'll see how it goes. But yeah, so to get into the background of this script in particular, so this was being developed as a sequel to Hunt for Red October because Paramount, for some reason, they picked up the rights to Red October. Then they picked up the rights to Patriot Games and Clear and Present Danger, just bypassed Cardinal of the Kremlin. And so John McTiernan, who did Hunt for Red October, he was developing it. He wanted to do Clear and Present Danger. He brings on John Milius, who rewrote the Russian scenes of Hunt for Red October at Sean Connery's request. And at the time, because Harrison Ford didn't sign until September of 91, and this draft is dated, it's dated 16th April of 1991, and it's a second draft. So Alec Baldwin would have still been attached at this point, I think. They hadn't signed it over to Harrison Ford yet, but there's all kinds of conflicting stories about that. Supposedly he didn't do it. The story for years that he didn't do it is because he was doing Streetcar Named Desire on Broadway. Years later, he said that Baldwin, I mean, said that he was forced to choose because the studio wanted a bigger name. Presumably Harrison Ford was in talks for Red October, but didn't actually do it because he thought it would have been too much of Ramius's movie instead of Ryan's, which I'm of the thinking that if he had known it would be Sean Connery, he might have been more amenable to it because he had worked well with Sean Connery in the past on Last Crusade, because it was originally going to be Klaus Maria Brandauer playing Marco Ramius, and he got into a car accident, broke his legs like a week or two before production, and he suggested Connery because they had worked together on Never Say Never Again, the unofficial Bond movie, and it went on from there. So I think if maybe he had known it would be Sean Connery, Ford might have actually done it. I don't know. That's just speculation on my part. But yeah, so McTiernan brings in John Milius. Presumably Alec Baldwin is still attached. And he wanted to do Clear and Present Danger, the very next movie after Hunt for Red October. So jumping into this, like I said, it's a second draft by John Milius dated 16th April 1991. And it opens on the U.S. Coast Guard cutter Panache as it tracks a yacht in the Caribbean via radar. The yacht, which is called the Empire Builder, and it's out of Mobile, Alabama, it doesn't respond to hails, so Captain Wegner has it boarded. It's found to be the site of a massacre. The owner, his wife, and two young daughters have all been killed. They don't show any of this. It's very confusing the first time I read this because they don't really explain it very well. They just say, oh, I think they're dead, and he thinks that the wife and the two young daughters were raped. And in the book, it's just a wife and a daughter and a son. And the man and the son were killed, and and that was done to the wife and the daughter. I don't know. I'm not going to speculate on motivation for the change, but they find drugs in the crew's quarters, and there's two men who are on board the boat. They're arrested and thrown in the brig as the ship moves into a storm. And a bunch of characters from the book, because the Coast Guard part of the book is a lot bigger. They're all here on the boat, but I'm not naming every name. Like Eras's here, who's becomes a recurring character in the books. He's in Without Remorse. I think he comes back in a couple others that I haven't gotten to yet. But I'm not going to go through them because they're not really important in this. They're just kind of background people. But so we then go to the White House, where the National Security Advisor, Vice Admiral James Cutter, meets with the president in the Oval Office, who shows him news reports about the yacht massacre. The president wants something done, and I'm not sure how the news reports got in that fast. This is still 1991. But Cutter suggests a black operation called Showboat, which apparently they're still dealing with. Showboat is a thing, and it's not well explained in this script at all, where the operation kind of changes. Because in the movie they change, because in the book it's Showboat is they're observing, they're basically doing black operations, intelligence gathering on the cartel we'll see it as we go along, so that they can intercept drug shipments, and then after a certain event happens, it changes to reciprocity, where they're directly attacking the cartels. And in the movie, they change it to it's just reciprocity from the beginning, because apparently the Pentagon had an issue with the Showboat part of it, which I've never been able to discover what the exact details of that are, what their exact objections were, because you'd think the relatively unobjectionable intelligence gathering thing would be fine. They take an issue with the starting a small war. You think that would be more of an issue, but then again, there's other things they took issue with, which we'll get to that when we get to the later part, where I'm I don't know what the problem was there either. But yeah, that's a thing. And the president, he's as long as he gets results, he doesn't care. And so we go back to the Panache, the storm worsens, and the captain, he tells the engineering officer that he basically he uses code language essentially to say fake an engine malfunction. And he then has the prisoners brought to the wardroom where they are put on trial according to an older form of maritime law, which is called. It has a longer name, but they refer to it by as rocks and shoals, something which is also not elaborated on here, which he says is justified by the storm and the engine failure. And the two pirates are found guilty and sentenced to death by hanging, and one is seemingly hanged from the mast, and the other gives a taped confession. And he's moved out to the flight deck in the morning, only to find his fellow pirate alive and well, the whole thing being a show. So yes, this is a subplot that's in the book that was taken out for the movie, and I can understand why, because as we go along, this is a very lengthy story thread in the book that's kind of, if Clancy had been a less popular writer, I think an editor could have argued to just take that out because it doesn't really affect a whole lot in the long run, which we'll get to that when we talk about it. So we then go to Cartagena, Colombia, where Jack Ryan enters the country under a false identity, and he meets with Agent John Clark, who flies him over the area and goes over their intelligence on the cartel as they observe, the boss's homes from the air, which they talk about are like these elaborate hilltop fortresses and all that. And this is interesting because this is where we start to see them bringing Jack Ryan more into the plot. And this is a sequence that is in the book, but it's Clark meeting with an operative on the ground to kind of gather intel before setting things up. Because Ryan, as I've said earlier, he is working in intelligence, which is a separate directorate from operations, which does the on the ground stuff. And it's a key point of both the book and the film. And in this, they kind of stick Ryan into the role of Bob Ritter, who is the deputy director of operations. And so he runs the operations directorate. He's the one who plans everything out. Ryan doesn't know a thing until later. And it seems like in a bid to give Ryan more of a role, they've kind of given some scenes to him that are supposed to be Ritter's. And that doesn't work because the script still tries to do the whole thing about being kept in the dark and even has him saying, I'm not an operations guy at one point. So yeah, that definitely needs a fix. And I think this is a change they made in the second draft because there's a scene later on where it's supposed to be Ryan in the scene, but the dialogue headers haven't been changed and it's Clark. So I think Clark originally had more of these scenes just by himself and they changed it in the second draft. Milius changed it probably on studio orders. And we then go inside the biggest of the cartel houses where the boss Ernesto Escobedo discusses his newest intelligence officer, the KGB trained Felix Cortez, who used to work for Castro but left him for better pay. The exposition could be a little more graceful because it's very much like, we have to get this information out so people can follow the plot. Move, move, move. There's a few places like that in this. And he says that Cortez is busy in Washington, and we go to them there where he's on a date before successfully seducing Moira Wolf, the secretary of FBI Director Emil Jacobs, posing as a Venezuelan widower named Roberto Diaz. And his fake first name has been changed from Juan? I don't know. That's something that always is weird to me in adaptations where they change a character's name for seemingly no reason. The go-to example I have of that is the original version of The Haunting, which is a brilliant movie in every way, but I always find it weird that certain character names are slightly changed, and it's like, why did you do that again? And we then go to Fort Ord, California, and the 7th Light Infantry Division, where Scout Sniper Domingo Chavez, nicknamed Ding, is training others, spotting a Sergeant Sniper Oso Julio, who is well hidden in camouflage. And he is then recruited by a Captain Ramirez for a secret operation, saying he'll be sent east for high altitude training, and that he can select an observer to come along, so long as he's also Hispanic. And he picks Oso, so we're seeing the operation get put together. And he also explains that he spotted Oso by catching sight of the rifle barrel, which stuck out like a sore thumb in the grass. And then he later tells Oso, he actually just kind of got lucky with that. It could have been, he could have easily missed it. He just happened to come upon it. So we're setting up how good Chavez is. Now, this scene, there's a lot of shit that goes on in the book, and it's been a little while since I finished it. I don't think this scene specifically happens. It's interesting how in the movie this scene is there, but they flip it around so that Chavez is the one hiding, and he successfully hides, which I think is a little bit more graceful way of showing he's really good at this shit. it's a little more detailed and takes up a little bit more time the way it is in the script. And so Ryan visits the FBI Academy in Quantico, Virginia, where he meets with Special Agent Dan Murray, who informs him of the situation with the pirates and the fake hanging. It's funny that Murray would have has such a big role in this, because when they put him in Patriot Games, they cut most of his scenes out of the movie, and it's just a scene of Murray walks into the room and Jack just warmly shakes hands with him like they've known each other for years when he's not been in Red October or the movie up to that point. And he just kind of sits around in Patriot Games, and he's in Clear and Present Danger a little bit. We'll talk about his role later because that scene happens in this, but differently. And that won't affect the case, as the other evidence is strong enough because they don't have to use the confession. But it did reveal that the owner of the yacht was dirty, laundering money for the cartel, and the massacre was a reprisal for him skimming money off the top. And so they followed up on this and discovered between $600 and $800 million worth of money that they plan to seize. And what's more, Director Jacobs plans to visit Colombia and talk to the Prime Minister about this to try and get more cooperation in operating against the cartel. He's also old friends with their Attorney General because they went to law school together, which is just barely mentioned in this script. And meanwhile, the recruits for the operation, including Chavez and Oso, undergo the rigorous high-altitude training. And it's not mentioned that they're in Colorado. It's interesting they don't say. They just go, oh yeah, they're high up. Because they're in Colorado in the book. But so Cortez meets with Escobedo in Colombia, mentioning that he has two intelligence sources, which I believe he says this in the book as well, but I don't think they ever follow up on the second one there either. But that could just be me misremembering. But he says one's going to cost money and one won't. And the one that won't is Moira. And I like when he tells Escobedo about this in the movie, because Escobedo immediately knows what he's doing. That was a great addition. And he checked in on the imprisoned men in Mobile. He used an intermediary to do it. And he says that they're not able to cut a deal with the feds. In fact, he suspects they're going to be sentenced to death. And Ryan then goes to Bethesda Naval Hospital, where his boss, Admiral James Greer, is dying of cancer. And this is this is a reason I don't like doing Clear and Present Danger right after Hunt for Red October, is because it means you won't get any more of James Earl Jones' Greer, who's great in all three movies he's in. And I just feel like it's a bit of a missed opportunity to skip ahead and not give him any more screen time, and especially considering he only has 2 scenes in this script. He's cut down to almost nothing, one of which he can't even talk in, which we'll get to later. So yeah, that's a reason I think doing another movie before this one was smart, but it shouldn't have been Patriot Games, really. It should have been Cardinal to Kremlin. And so he informs Greer of the operation so far and that he doesn't trust Cutter. And Greer tells him that's good and that he should do what he knows is right. The politics be damned, because you're smart, you know your job, you know what you're doing. And then we get this scene where Ryan visits the Panache, which is docked in the Everglades. And this dude must be flying fucking everywhere in this script, because he's moved into scenes he has no business being in at times, to inform Captain Wegner that he's working under the CIA for now. And this is where we get dialogue headings that sometimes say Clark instead of Ryan. So I think in the first draft, some of these scenes with Ryan working on the operation, it's supposed to be Clark, and that they just stuck him in a couple of them so that Jack Ryan could have more screen time. And also, it's not explained here exactly what they want the Panache for. Basically, they end up using it as like a staging point for the operation. They can take that they can fly into Colombia. They can use it as like a stopping point for their helicopters to fly them into Colombia, and they're also using it as a communications hub. That is not in the book, I'm pretty sure. Their reasons for when they show up later on are completely different. And Ryan then meets with Cutter at the White House, informing him of everything so far and insisting that the president be briefed. And he insists also on getting permission for the operation in writing from Cutter before he goes. This is a Ritter scene from the book that they give to Ryan. And Ritter in the movie gets made into way more of an asshole and the villain. And it's funny because he's played by Henry Czerny, who plays the role exactly the same way as he plays his character in Mission Impossible just a couple years later. It's so fucking funny, I have to mention. And that's a change in the movie, which I'm kind of 50-50 on, because it totally works for the movie, but it's kind of weird that a guy who's pretty consistently, like, not necessarily a nice guy, but is ultimately well-intentioned and one of the good guys in the books. They kind of I guess because in beefing up Ryan's investigation, they felt like they had to give him like a nemesis for those scenes. I guess that's why they did it. But it's one I'm kind of 50-50 on. So yeah, Ritter taken out of this script completely. It's interesting because he gets taken out of this script. He gets taken out of all the other movies too because he's not in Some of All Fears so far. In fact, it's mentioned that he's since retired. But like he's in Red October and Patriot Games, I think very briefly, and Cardinal of the Kremlin. He's in that too. And they cut him out of the two movies they made, and they almost cut him out of this one, only to turn him into the villain. That's actually very funny. That's very funny to me for some reason. And so late at night over the Caribbean, the infantrymen they get dropped off on the Panache, where they prepare themselves for the mission. And Chavez tells Oso his sister died of an overdose, which is why he's you know all in on this mission. He wants to do it. And so back in Washington, Director Jacobs tells Moira to set up his schedule for the Colombian trip. And she gets called by Cortez, and she tells him Jacobs will be out of town, but doesn't say where he's going. But she tells him that they can set up a romantic getaway once he does leave. And so we go back to the Panache. Clark arrives in the Black Hawk to pick up the 20 men to fly them to Colombia. The helicopter being piloted by a guy called Colonel Johns, who's significant, but doesn't really do much later on. Like, he does some important stuff, but it's not a lot. And the thing about Clark that they change in the movie that's weird is that his most of the movie, I think his characterization is fine. The introductory scene where Ritter goes to like Panama to recruit him, it implies he's like this dickhead mercenary who just is doing it for the money, which is a strange change because like Clark is like a CIA guy through and through in the books. Like he works for them; it's his job. He like trains for them, and he's like older, so he doesn't do as many missions anymore. But he still does like on special for like really special stuff. They pull him out because he's really good and knows what he's doing. And in the movie, it's weird because it's like, who is this guy? He's this weird hairy guy. Like Willem Dafoe does a good job, but he's this weird bearded hairy guy who's just hanging out in like a bar in Panama City. It's like this dude. But it's a strange characterization. So while en route, Clark has them hand over their dog tags and any other means of identifying them because it's a black operation, it has to be deniable before they land in Colombia and head into the jungle. And elsewhere, Cortez meets with Escobedo at a hotel where he just finished visiting one of his mistresses. Like Escobedo literally comes out of the elevator post coitus to come talk to him. And he says, "Hey, your yacht massacre was unprofessional." And Escobedo's like shrugs it off, saying that's how we do things. And then Cortez tells him about the director's trip there, even if he isn't sure it's related. And so here comes another scene where Ryan is just in it for no good reason. At the Federal Detention Center in Mobile, Murray, Ryan, and U.S. Attorney Davidoff meet with the pirates' lawyer Stewart, who wants to make a deal to take the death penalty off the table. I mistyped some stuff in these notes. Murray lets Stewart think that the pirates are already talking to them, which he explains later to Ryan isn't fully a lie. He's trying to... He implies that the pirates have told them all they know, and then he goes to Ryan like, well, technically they've told us their names, which is most of what they know. But this backfires because Stewart calls Cortez through this front number in Venezuela, which is also how Moira is communicating with him, telling him that the pirates are talking, and they end up getting shivved in the prison shower by assassins sent by Escobedo. This is the subplot I was talking about, because the pirates have a huge role in the book, where like they're going on trial, and then their lawyer, who is... He's not like a cartel stooge, but he takes money from them. And he's defending them because he's against the death penalty and he really believes in it. So he finds like the Coast Guard crew in a bar. They're pretty drunk. He poses as an officer, which the book specifies is actually a crime, which should get the evidence thrown out. But he records them without their knowledge talking about it. Tries to blackmail Davidoff into giving them a lighter sentence. Then the cartel is like, no, get them free. So he tries to get them free. So he tries to play hardball, trying to get them off completely. And then because there was a corrupt cop who tosses the yacht owner's house trying to find information, who misses the stuff that the FBI later finds, they assassinate him. And because he gets assassinated, they know he gets killed by a cartel guy. The cops decide after the pirates now going to try and get off scot-free, they find these two twins who they're the guys who kill them in the showers in the script. But they find them, cut them a deal, make sure the evidence against them disappears so that they kill those two guys in the shower as reprisal for the dirty cop getting killed. And then that's that whole subplot. And then like the FBI is like, yeah, your whole thing went away, so panache, you owe us, or something, and that's how they end up playing a role later. It's a long, drawn out subplot. I don't know why any of it is in this. Considering this is struggling to cram plot into like a 2 hour length movie, that's like the first thing I would cut from the book if I was making it into a movie, to be honest, because it really isn't that relevant to anything else that's going on. But yeah, so that's it. So they changed it around quite a bit and simplified it, but even still, it just feels like a distraction. And also, all this stuff in Mobile with Murray and the FBI, there's a local FBI agent who's in all of Murray's scenes down there, who's handling the investigation and everything. They basically took him out of this. This isn't a specific scene in the book or anything, but basically, I feel like in the first draft, it would have been that guy, and then they stuck Ryan in there just to give Ryan an extra scene. And so the teams operating under Showboat begin observing airfields to send out drug shipments, making it easier for the U.S. to shoot them down before they get there. And the pilot, and they refer to by the code name here as the pilot that shoots them down is Bronco Zulu. And Bronco, the pilot, is a character in the book who actually has like development and stuff, and he gets like his own scene and like the wrap up showing what happened to him. He's mostly cut out of this, completely cut out of the movie. But so they shoot them down before they get there. And then director Jacobs meets with Cutter and the president to discuss the drug money they're going to seize. And he knows about Showboat because it's explained in the book that the FBI deals with intelligence stuff too. It's all complicated. But he expresses his distaste for Showboat, saying they've landed their biggest victory through solid police work. And the president just says, hey, be careful. They're also friends. More drug planes continue to be shot down, and Cortez meets with Escobedo at his estate to discuss this. And he warns the drug lord not to underestimate the FBI because they almost got me in Puerto Rico. And in the book, it's explained that he was working for like these terrorists in Puerto Rico at Castro's request, and that him almost getting nabbed by the FBI is what makes him leave Castro. It's not just the money. And director Jacobs lets Moira know he's leaving on Friday and later on at home. She calls Cortez through the Caracas number, and he soon makes arrangements to leave, informing Escobedo of the director's imminent arrival in Colombia. And as he travels to America and Jacobs travels to Colombia, the FBI and the Attorney General announce the seizure of the cartel's money on television, which is viewed by Escobedo, who calls a meeting with the other cartel bosses, who decide to strike back to avenge their losses here. And I just fucking rhymed like I'm that dude from the Dolph Lundgren Punisher, Jesus Christ. And so Cortez meets Moira and takes her to this isolated retreat, which I think is literally called the Hideaway, for a romantic getaway. Jacobs arrives in Bogota, meeting with the U.S. ambassador to Colombia, and the motorcade transporting them through the city is ambushed by men with RPGs and blown to pieces, killing them. This sequence is in the movie, but they expanded it so that Ryan is there in Colombia to look at what's going on, and he's in the convoy when it gets attacked, and it's a much more elaborate action scene. Like this sticks close to scene from the book where they just get ambushed, boom, it's over. And it's a really great action scene, and it works for the movie. And like, I think it's really cool. I'm glad they put it in there. That's also where they kill Dan Murray in the book, in the movie, and it's like he's like a continuing character through the books, and it doesn't really have the. I think they wanted to like have a named character die so it'd have more impact, but because Murray doesn't really do a whole lot in the movies, it doesn't really have an impact. It's like, oh yeah, that guy who was in like 2 scenes in Patriot Games. Oh yeah, he's dead. But otherwise, that's a good addition. And apparently, Milius came up with that at the request of the producers. So I'm guessing in like a third draft, he did that before they brought the other writers in to rewrite this. Maybe he did that. I don't know. Well, we know he did that. I just don't know when he did that. Was it before Patriot Games got going? Was it after? I have no idea. So the president is at Camp David when he gets the news and tells a group of people, including Cutter and Ryan, that he is going to treat this like a war and the gloves will come off. Ryan should not be there because he's not supposed to know about what's happening, which he says so 3 scenes later, I'm pretty sure. And so back at the bungalow, Moy receives the news report along with Cortez's reaction to it, pieces together what happened, and then Cortez strangles her to death with a shirt collar. Before luring another guest into the room, he kills this man, steals his clothes in order to sneak away. So this is a change that's in the movie that Milius is actually responsible for, because in the book, he does not kill Moira. he just kind of says he's going back home and leaves her because he knows he can't use this source anymore because Escobedo fucked things up. And there's this whole back and forth about how he didn't perform as well sexually as he did before. And Moira's like, oh no, I pushed him too far, blah, blah, blah. There's a thing Clancy has been doing. He does it in both Clear and Present Danger and a little bit in Some of All Fears so far, but not as much, where he'll write like romantic sexual partnerships, and the sexual encounter stuff is just, he is not good at writing it. It's just really cheesy. That's one thing I don't like about his writing is, yeah, sometimes he gets a little too technically detailed and it's annoying. Him trying to write sex is just ugh. But so no, in the book she lives and ends up being like an important part of like of proceedings from there on out. So that's a change he came up with that continues on to the movie. Now, in the movie, it's for a different reason because Cortez is making a move against the cartel because he's decided he wants to take it over, which he doesn't make that decision in the book until after this because in the movie he also plans the attack on the FBI director as part of his play, making him more of the central villain, whereas in the book it's more decentralized, where it's like Cortez is doing things, Escobedo is doing things, and they all kind of collide by the end, which I suppose makes sense if you're trying to like slim down the plot and centralize it a little more, and I think it works for the movie, but it necessitates a different sort of climax than the book has. And so we go back to Camp David. The president speaks privately with Cutter about using Showboat as a means of retaliation, with Cutter saying he can talk to Clark about it, keeping everyone else out of the loop, including Ryan, and they can even pin it on Clark if things go wrong. And which is contrary to the scene they were just in, where Ryan is right there with the president basically talking about this. And so Cutter has Clark brought to Andrews Air Force Base, tells him the president is sending him hunting without a bag limit, and he also determines that Ryan should be kept out of the loop as he is too much of a Boy Scout. Now, Ryan being kept out of the loop in the book is more because Ritter is his operations directorate hasn't had like a really good coup in a while. Like they haven't had like a really big success. Like the biggest successful operations were involving Ryan, who is supposed to be intelligence, namely Red October and Cardinal de Kremlin. And so he wants to like rejuvenate his side of the CIA. And he also doesn't like Ryan because he doesn't trust him. He thinks he's risen too far too fast, which is kind of true reading the books, because I mean he gets recruited in and is almost immediately being groomed to be James Greer's successor from almost the start. And so the Showboat teams now there's four. It's not really explained very well in the script, and it's not dwelt on a lot in the book either, but there's four different teams who are operating like semi-independently of each other, and in the movie they condense it down to just one, which is probably for the best. You know, it makes things simpler. You don't have to cast as many people, and on the page here it's a little confusing. But there's four different teams, and they're now attacking cartel airfields and drug laboratories directly, killing everyone and demolishing the locations with explosives to make themselves harder to track. And so we go back to the U.S. Murray is investigating the deaths of Moira and that poor guy who wandered in. After getting eyewitness descriptions of the killer, he checks with Ryan, who shows him a file photo of Felix Cortez. He says, he used to work for Castro. He says they'll use their spy satellites to ferret out the cartel's comms channels, which is something they do all along, but Jack doesn't have access to it yet. We're mixing and matching character stuff in this compared to the book, which is a little confusing. And also in the book, the reason they haven't nabbed Cortez yet is because they also don't have a good picture of him. They kind of have a picture from the Puerto Rico incident, but they're not sure it's him. And that's part of how Moira helps, is that she testifies, she gives a physical description, and she's able to figure out. She's able to help them figure out what he looks like. And after several more attacks, Clark recruits Chavez for another job and has a car delivered, handing Chavez this laser designator finder, basically something you can point at and it's used for targeting. He tells him to inspect it. And so Cortez, he's investigating the attack sites and determines that the Americans are behind it, because he's checking like the ammo, and so he's looking at he basically finds stuff on the ground that lets him suspect it. And Escobedo isn't so sure and isn't pleased when Cortez chides him for killing the FBI director, which forced him to give up his source, aka Moira. And Cortez then apologizes and offers to make the call himself when Escobedo says he's putting together a meeting of all the cartel bosses. And CIA's satellite picks up a conversation between the cartel bosses regarding this meeting. Ryan brings the information to Cutter, who stonewalls him when he asks about what's going on, saying that operations isn't his responsibility anymore, even though several scenes earlier he said he wasn't in operations. That happens. There's a scene where he's talking to Murray and he says, I'm DDI. I'm information gathering. I don't do that stuff," even though he's been doing operations this whole script. Yeah, this draft is a bit of a mess. And meanwhile, Clark and Chavez, they set up their laser thing near the hilltop fortress where the meeting is being held, and they sight their target on the huge monster truck that one of the bosses drove up to the house, which guides in a stealth bomb made of cellulose, which leaves no fragments, and destroys the house, making it look like a car bomb. Boom! That is a cool scene in the movie. It's an interesting scene in the book, and like the implications of it are horrific. And that bomb, it's a plot device here and in the movie. In the book, that's how Jack figures out what's going on, because his Navy pilot friend Robbie Jackson, who's played by Samuel L. Jackson in the Patriot Games movie, he figures out what's going on because apparently like their security on the operation was not very good, and so like people started figuring things out immediately, and he started putting pieces together, and he tells Jack, "Hey, I think this is what happened," and that's what puts Jack on course to fix things. And Escobedo and Cortez are still in transit when the bomb hits, but the shockwave flips over the BMW they're in and makes them roll down a hill. But they soon arrive at the remains of the house, and Cortez agrees to begin investigating. And so Clark returns Chavez to his team, and they find out all the teams are now losing men in the attacks as the cartel soldiers are getting better at keeping an eye out and defending themselves. And Clark says he'll try to get them resupply. And also, Clark and Chavez going out there and doing it, that's also the character from the book who's the pilot. He does that with Clark. Clark and Chavez don't meet until much later. Why can I not remember that guy's fucking name? I should know it. And so back in DC, the president is horrified at the news, especially seeing the body of a child removed from the wreckage on CNN. But Cutter insists this is just a consequence of what he ordered them to do. And as Ryan begins to smell a rat regarding the so-called car bomb, Cortez continues his investigation, having two of the survivors tortured and paying a police chemist to turn over the info on the explosive, who tells him it's a substance called octol, manufactured in the US. And it's really interesting. It's really cool how they do this because Ryan and Cortez both figure out about the stealth bomb by checking the same book called Jane's Weapons Systems, which is a reference guide. With, of course, John Milius, being the big gun nut that he is, would of course know what that is. And I think it's cool that it's like intercut. Like Ryan's looking it up, and then it cuts to Cortez with a slightly more battered, rougher looking copy, also finding it. And while Ryan tells Murray he's not no wait, so it was later, not earlier. Yeah, he said he's not operations and that he thinks someone's starting a war in Colombia. Cortez confides in one of his lieutenants named Halder, showing him the Chinese symbol for crisis made of two smaller symbols, which he explains as one is for danger, the other is for opportunity. So he's making his move against the cartel to take it over. And Halder, they mentioned that he's like from Argentina and that he's like he's like the son or grandson of a Nazi, which I think he is in the book, but I'm like, why would you include that detail here? It's completely superfluous. And so Cortez, he pulls out Moira's address book. I'm not sure where he got it because I don't think it comes up in that scene where he kills her. And he faxes Cutter, telling him he'll help him reach his objections soon and that he'll take action as a show of goodwill. What's funny about this is I remember this chapter in the book very specifically because Tom Clancy goes on for a while just like he goes on forever just being like just rhapsodizing about this fax machine. And I'm like this book came out in 89, man. No one like fax machines were common tech by that point. Like it's like, oh my god, this fax machine that's so great. Anyone who's what the fuck am I saying? Everyone who's anyone in DC has a fax machine. And I'm like, okay, dude, calm down. I remember that chapter very clearly. And he then meets with Escobedo, lies about the explosive, saying an inside man working with the Americans laid the car bomb, claiming he learned this from a servant who died during the interrogation. And he then bends to light a cigar, which is a signal he prearranged with Halder, who then starts firing sniper rounds into Escobedo's study. Cortez saves his boss and sends the drug lord's men to look for the shooter. He lags behind and meets up with Halder and then just guns him down. This is a new scene, and this is a smart adaptation thing they do here. This is a smaller scene created to cover for the removal of a bigger scene, because the way Cortez kind of earns Escobedo's trust in this matter is that he gets him to hang back because they're having another meeting in a different house. He gets him to hang back and says, "I think the other guys are moving against you," and then and then Clark has that house bombed too. And I feel like doing it like this kind of removes the redundancy of the second bombing. So yeah, I think this was a smart move in terms of in terms of the adaptation because it serves the same purpose but is less coincidental too. And so at Camp David again, the president is angry with Cutter, having had to field questions about Colombia during a press conference. Where apparently people are, because like in the book, people are pretty much figuring out what's going on immediately. Like it's not very well hidden. And Governor Fowler of Ohio, who is the person he's running against, who is significant in the next book, Sum of All Fears, is basically asked a question about it, and his answer, which it's not really stated here, but in the book, he's trying to be diplomatic about it, but that basically just gives the press the whiff of maybe this is actually what's going on, and that causes a whole press nightmare for the president. He tells Cutter he wants the operation shut down, he doesn't care how, and if any of this goes public, he'll see to it that Cutter goes to jail. At the CIA's training center called The Farm, Ryan is approached by an aide who tells him all the disks needed for the operations communications have been pulled by Cutter. Gotta love that early 90s technology. Ryan meets with the Admiral, who says he's shutting things down and is handling the details, like getting the men out of there. And so I have to talk about Cutter. Cutter in the book, and it's not really explained here, here it kind of just seems like he's kind of weak-willed and so goes along with like the best deal he gets. In the movie, he's much more of a jerk, much more of a self-centered jerk and kind of an asshole. In the book, he's much more just kind of incompetent than anything. Like he is an admiral. He did actually have like an actual command and stuff, which got him to that point. But he spent most of his career working in the Pentagon. He hasn't really been in the field of battle all that much, and so he's never really had to deal with this kind of thing before. He kind of is floundering, and so he jumps at this. So he's a little bit more nuanced there, whereas in the movie he's just a jerk, and here he's just kind of weak. And so in Colombia, armed men led by Cortez start pouring into the jungle to look for the American soldiers, maneuvering them into an area with only one way out. Clark realizes that he's lost communications with the men in the field and calls Cutter, who passes the blame to Ryan and tries to set up Clark to be shot down when he says he's flying to Panama, but Clark manages to talk the fighters down over the radio. And back in Maryland, Ryan has a discussion with his wife about what's going on and determines to do something about it. And then Clark shows... So this is the only scene Ann Archer would get in this movie, because I'm pretty sure Gates McFadden would have already been out because she got back onto Next Generation by that point. I'm pretty sure she's only in Hunt for Red October because she got cut from season 2. But yeah, so this would have been the only scene Ann Archer gets in this version of the movie. And she already got her subplot cut out of the movie they made, which apparently upset her or something fierce. And so Clark shows up at his house with a gun just as Ryan is calling Murray to set things up. And they meet, finally, with Murray setting up surveillance on Cutter, while Ryan and Clark fly to Columbia to pull out the soldiers. Also, by the way, Milius continuously misspells Columbia with a U instead of an O. It's not the district, it's the country. And so the teams begin to be wiped out by the cartel's men, with Team Knife, which is Chavez and Oso's team, taking on the survivors. Cutter flees to Panama, where he meets with Cortez, unknowingly followed by Murray. And Cortez makes a deal with him, saying that he plans to take over the cartel and will promise a decrease in drug shipments to the U.S. in exchange for Cutter cutting the soldiers loose. I'm sorry, that was the only way I could think of the phrase when I was taking the notes, so he can have a big victory to cement his position. And I think it's clarified more in the book that he's not going to stick by the deal forever. He will eventually, increase shipments again. But his argument, actually, you can see why it's persuasive, because he says, really, your government, you guys don't actually care about the drugs. It's the violence that comes along with them, which is what you're so upset about. So I'm going to take care of that problem for you like that. So it makes sense why a guy like Cutter, who's kind of floundering, would go for it. And so the Admiral reluctantly agrees while Murray photographs them shaking hands. He then visits Colonel Johns, orders him to fly his helicopter back to the U.S. before getting on the plane back to Washington. But Johns is then met by Murray, who convinces him to stay and help. Murray then ends up in the communications center on the Panache, where he finds out the CIA operator made copies of the discs and gets the comms back up. So that's way less of an issue than it was in the book, where in the book they're just, and in the movie too, they're just completely cut off. And the soldiers then contacted and told to make for an extraction point because they have several prearranged locations. And they choose LZ Dallas, which is on a hill in the middle of a swamp, which this is where we start getting into the Battle of Ninja Hill, which is a thing in. It's not exact. They've kind of compressed the whole last part of this down, which is kind of a necessity for a movie. But in the book, they basically get cornered on top of the hill by the cartel guys, and it's a big battle where the cartel takes most of them out, but they also kill a shitload of guys too before it happens. But like a few of the survivors manage to escape, and they eventually get picked up by Ryan and Clark, and then they go back to get Cortez and Escobedo. Here, it's all kind of compressed down, and none of that really happens. There's a big battle where all the teams kind of coalesce on the hill, and that's the climax here. Clark and Ryan are making their way towards the location when they run into a flatbed truck manned by cartel thugs. And so this is weird because this is different than it is in the book. They somehow get the thugs to get their truck stuck in a ditch. And Clark determines that the flatbed has the bodies of dead soldiers in it, and while Ryan is running the engine to cover the noise, Clark shoots one of the men. Ryan gets the second, taking his MP5 away and blasting him with it. And then Clark then double taps the corpses to be sure. This happens before Ryan goes down in the book. It's Clark and that other guy run into this, and then Clark just kills all of them himself, and the other dude is like, oh my. And so meanwhile, the soldiers have dug in on the hill and defend it from the cartel guys, who bunch up and approach the hill by this. It's this one tiny stretch of dry land running through the swamps, and because they're all bunched together, it makes them easier targets. They're all grouped up and they just get taken down. They just get mowed down like wheat. And Escobedo, Cortez, and a few other highly placed cartel generals stick to the rear of the fighting on horseback as the battle commences, and Cortez forces Escobedo to get down when they realize there's sniper fire going on. And then the drug lord then has Cortez change jackets with him, basically to use him to draw fire, which shows how much he really values him at this point. And as Johns' Black Hawk begins to fly in, Clark and Ryan begin to approach the battle on foot, letting the soldiers know that the extraction is coming, and come in by the flank, which has been left open because these cartel killers are not professional soldiers and don't know how to fight a battle. And the battle continues until Johns gets the Black Hawk in and picks up the surviving soldiers, except for Oso and Chavez, who get separated in the chaos and end up getting a ride from Ryan and Clark. And Cutter meets with the president, telling him the operation has been terminated, and he lies to him, saying it's been done within the law. And so back in Colombia, Clark, Ryan, Chavez, and Oso, they sneak up on the cartel's base camp. And the switch in jackets confuses them, so they think that the guy in the less fancy jacket is Cortez. So Chavez snipes him, and so Chavez snipes Escobedo, and Cortez is able to slip away. The Black Hawk is shot up pretty bad, but almost gets stopped by the Colombian Air Force before Bronco Zulu, the fighter pilot from earlier, forces them to back off at gunpoint. That's not what happens in the script, in the book. In the book, the helicopter gets caught up in a tropical storm or hurricane that's coming in, and they're forced to land on the Panache, who happens to be there because the FBI directed them there as a favor, get them to do it as a favor. And so Ryan, Clark, Chavez, and Oso, they fly out on Clark's Cessna, where Clark asks the two soldiers to come work for him. Now, this plays out differently in the book, because they fly in, they get the surviving guys out, and they're like, and they get the helicopter from like the Black Operations Unit, so it's kind of like this, but it's a little bit different in the book. And once again, I don't know why the Pentagon objected to them just getting the helicopter and going. So in the movie, they changed it to admittedly a pretty funny scene where Ryan has to buy a helicopter when he's there. I don't know why they would object to. It seems fine. Who fucking knows what the guy was thinking at the time? But so they go down there, they help get the guys out, and then they go back to capture Escobedo and Cortez. And there's a big battle. They're like, so Ryan never leaves the helicopter, but he's manning one of the guns. He's manning like a minigun and like takes part in the action. Like, he does more action stuff in the book than he does in this, which is kind of funny when you think about it. But then like getting out of there proves to be a pretty big battle as well. And then but then Ryan's like, I'm not gonna let you just kill Escobedo. Like we need Cortez because he did shit in the US, but we can't actually do anything to Escobedo. So Clark takes him back to Colombia and then gives him over to the other cartel heads, making them think that he's the traitor, and so they kill him. So that's different. And so to continue on, Cortez then flies to Washington, where he confronts Cutter while out on his morning jog, thinking the admiral has gone back on his word and pulled the soldiers out of Columbia himself. He then takes out his newspaper, like smashes a bottle inside it, and somehow he sprays prussic acid into Cutter's face, which gives him a heart attack or makes it look like a heart attack. Cortez flees through some dark alleyways where some junkies attempt to mug him for drug money, and the way they convey that information is having him go, "Man, I don't have any more smack. Give me your money, bro," or something like that. And I'm like, you can fix that. That's bad dialogue. He manages to fight off one with, I think he says it's like jujitsu, Brazilian jiu-jitsu, but another one pulls a gun and shoots him before fleeing. And so the mortally wounded Cortez staggers out onto the Washington Mall, sits down on the park bench. He looks to the Capitol, looks to the Washington Monument, kind of laughs at the irony of him dying here in, the center of American government, which he's been fighting for his whole life, lights up a cigar, has one last smoke as he dies. And if you can't tell, that's a Milius invention, because he had to put a cigar in there somewhere. A Cuban cigar, specifically. And it's an interesting visual, because as he dies, the cigar falls out of his mouth and the leaf actually unrolls. Interesting visual. So in the book, Cortez gets captured along with Escobedo, and they're forced to put down on the Panache, which then they stop for refueling and resupply at Guantanamo Bay. And then like Ryan and like Murray, I think they confer and they say, hey, the biggest crime we can actually get him on is entering the country illegally. So they instead say, hey, they instead hand him over to Cortez, who's implied is going to handily execute him for betraying him. And Moira, who's still alive, she watches as the handover is done. That's the last scene of the book. It's pretty great. I can see why they didn't include it, because it would have meant more page time, more screen time, and they're trying to fit it into a more reasonable length movie. But that's a pretty cool. I do think this death scene is pretty cool. It's one of the more interesting additions here. So Ryan, he meets with the president in the White House, confronting him with the fact that men died because of a lie. And he talks about how, they swore an oath. Did you not swear one too? And he tells him that, I'm going to be debriefed by 2 members of Congress. But he tells the president the findings can remain classified, and the only thing he asks for in return is that he serves out the rest of his term with honor. And he walks out of the office and down the hallway, and it ends. So this is like the book a little bit, like they kind of like simplified it, but everything gets taken care of behind closed doors, but the president doesn't get reelected. In fact, he's so guilt-ridden over it, it's confirmed in Some of All Fears that he deliberately sabotaged his own campaign. So that's different from the movie, because the president in the movie is a lot more of a villain. He's a lot meaner and nastier. And so in the movie, that's used to justify Ryan taking it public and blowing the doors off it, which that was apparently Tom Clancy's huge issue with the movie, was that changed ending. And personally, I think it works fine. Personally speaking, I think it was a political issue on his part, because I've read his comments on it. And he said, what, you're going to trust Congress? They're a bunch of snakes. And I'm like, executive branch doesn't come out of your story looking too good, man. It don't seem much better. But I think that ending, I think the ending of the book works. I think it would have worked in the movie too, but I think the movie's ending works as well. And of course that leads to Fowler becoming the president, who is a significant presence in Some of All Fears, to say the least. So that was the Milius version of Clear and Present Danger. Overall thoughts, I think it's a fine enough, it gets the plot of the book down okay, because the book is more focused on the operation than it is on Ryan anyways. But it just feels like in their attempts to try and make it a Jack Ryan movie, which in all fairness, they can understand why, they kind of lost a little bit of what the book is actually about, with Ryan being an operations guy and then not being. If you haven't read the book, it's very confusing, because the shift to Operation Reciprocity, not explained in this. In fact, reciprocity comes up once in dialogue. It's not explained what they mean by that. And it's very confusing. It's very choppy. The pacing doesn't feel right. And I can't really fully get on board with this version. And it's a shame, because John Milius is one of my favorite screenwriters. I mean, he did a hell of a job writing and directing Conan the Barbarian. I enjoy Red Dawn, which he rewrote. His script for King Conan's great. His script for Without Remorse is really, really fucking good. Way better than this. I like Wind in the Lion's great. He wrote... Apocalypse Now isn't exactly his script, but a lot of it that's in that movie is from him, and it's real, and the stuff he wrote was still really good. It's just different from what the movie ended up being ultimately. Jeremiah Johnson, even though that was rewritten, that's a great movie. He's one of my favorite screenwriters of all time. His stuff just leaps off the page. And it just doesn't do that here because I think it's just Clear and Present Danger is a tough fucking nut to crack to adapt into a movie. It's got a huge ensemble, it's got a lot of stuff going on, and I don't really blame him for stumbling. It was a problem. So, yeah, this gets turned in. The studio decides to go, so just to fill in, the remainder of the background here. The studio, who for some reason they were bound and determined to make Patriot games, like almost pathologically so. Sorry, my vocabulary was failing me there. To the point where they were like, there was like lawsuits, there was legal disputes over the rights, and they went through all this shit and said, no, we're doing this one. And then McTiernan, because he's Irish American, he didn't want to deal with the subject matter, so he leaves. Alec Baldwin either leaves or gets forced out, depending on who's talking. They bring in Harrison Ford, they do Patriot games, which apparently pisses off Tom Clancy initially, and then before the movie comes out, he backpedals and endorses it. And then they decide we're going to do Clear and Present Danger. We have the rights. This Milia script isn't going to work. There's not a big enough part for Harrison Ford. They bring in Donald Stewart to rewrite it because he had worked on the previous two movies to like center Jack Ryan more. I've read a little bit of that. And I think it's not good. I'm not sure if it's that good because like I read a little bit of like the president's dialogue and like they write him as like I'm from fucking Texas and I talk like that sport and it's like oh my god what are you doing? And then that apparently upset Clancy to the point where he was publicly talking bad about the changes to the plot. And so they bring in Steven Zalian to both beef up Ryan's role some more, apparently, and try and please Clancy at once. Clancy wasn't pleased. Allegedly, according to Milius, he was pleased by Milius's first draft, so maybe that's good. Maybe that's better than the one I have. Maybe this is like the compromised version, as I've speculated. But then the movie gets made, there's all these kinds of changes to it, and they apparently had to change their climax significantly because Paramount pulled money from the budget or something and wouldn't give them the time to shoot the bigger climax they had. There's supposed to be like a big chase scene through the streets of like this Colombian city that and Clark was supposed to participate more in it. Willem Dafoe was supposed to get more to do. And then the studio's like, no, we're not giving you the money for this. So you get a smaller but still satisfying climax where they have to, because in the movie, the soldiers all get captured and Ryan has to go liberate them. And Cortez comes more into the fore as the main villain, and it's like those two versus each other at the end. It's still a good climax. I kind of wish they got to shoot the full thing. So that comes out, it gets good reviews, it's a hit. And just to kind of sum up the ending of what happened to the Philip Noyce and Harrison Ford era of Jack Ryan, Paramount farted around for the better part of a decade. They're like, they eventually do pay Tom Clancy a shitload of money for the rights to Sum of All Fears, so, his can't have objected to Clear and Present Danger too much if he's not going to say no to the money. And then the producer, Mace Neufeld, is like, actually, we don't really want to do Sum of All Fears because the subject matter might be too controversial. And it really does sound like they're being super cowardly about because it involves the Arab-Israeli conflict, and reading the book, it's handled in a fairly non-controversial way, at least to my view. It's kind of naive, and I don't think what they do there would really work in real life. But, it feels like it would have been fine. I'm not seeing anything that would have been objectionable to a 90s audience. And it's like, but he had cold feet about that, and so they're like, maybe we'll do Cardinal of the Kremlin, because, we're looking at, what's going on in Russia now. Maybe it makes sense to do it now. They spend years working trying to make that work. They end up dumping that because they had Lee and Janet Scott Batchelor were writing the scripts. I'd love to read that because they're good writers, but apparently they found the material to be unworkable, which I guess is because of the Cold War elements. And so they scrapped that. Apparently William Shatner was going to co-star in that. I don't know who has. But that gets scrapped. They decide maybe they'll do Dead of Honor, which is the book after Sum of All Fears, which that would have been even more controversial, if anything, based on what I know of that. Or maybe doing an original movie not based on any books. And so they finally come around to doing Sum of All Fears in 1999. Akiva Goldsman writes a couple drafts of the script. Harrison Ford and Philip Noyce don't like it. I've read his first draft. It's not amazing, but it's pretty decent, I think. I think it was a good starting point, but I also say that having not finished the book yet, so who knows if I'll dislike it even more by the time I'm done with that. But I feel like it was a pretty decent starting point. I know people aren't going to believe me because nobody likes Akiva Goldsman's writing but me. And even I'm kind of conditional on that. But I thought his script was pretty good. But Harrison Ford and Philip Noyce aren't satisfied with it. They bring in Paul Addonazio to do a rewrite. Apparently, they're not satisfied with that, so they just up and quit, and it gets turned into a reboot, which is a shame because I think if they could have gotten one or two more movies out of Harrison Ford, you would have had like a pretty solid fucking franchise. Or recast with someone who could also be good as Jack Ryan. I know Harrison Ford's a big name, but he's not the only big name in Hollywood. I mean, come on, guys. If you could recast once, you could recast again. But what do I know? I'm a bear. I suck the heads off fish. And now I've gone into Kiss Kiss Bang Bang territory. So yeah, overall, this script, there's potential in it. It's just messily executed. And I think it's just something you were gonna run into with that source material at some stage of development. But yeah, Clear and Present Danger, interesting script. It's worth reading. I can confirm because I first read this before I read the book, and I found it to be incomprehensible the first time. And I can kind of follow it a bit more having read the book. But that being said, that should not be a prerequisite. So yeah, this is a Milius script I can't really give a thumbs up to, but he gets credit for putting the effort in, and at least it was a good effort. It just doesn't work. But yeah, so that was Clear and Present Danger. Maybe someday, maybe if that Amazon series spin-off movie actually comes out, maybe then I'll do the Sum of All Fears script because I should be done with that book by then if it happens at all. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed this episode. It's gonna be like very much like this is like a special interest from me and like whatever Tom Clancy fans listen to this. I don't know if like the audience is really at large is going to like this episode. I don't know if it's going to do as well as Creature from the Black Lagoon did with the numbers, but I enjoyed making it. I hope you guys enjoyed listening, and until next time, bye.